Language acquisition is the ability to hear, speak, and listen a language. Aside from that, it's much more complex and detailed. Language acquisition requires an individual through stages to develop an understanding and use of vocabulary, phonological components, grammar structure, and writing structure. Each individual learns and acquires a language at their own pace, even though this process does start at birth as soon as infants start hearing sounds. Impeding factors of language acquisition can happen when children are young at home or in the school setting. An example of this is lack of oral language exposure. So when children are young, they're being read to and spoken to by their parents, included in conversations by their family, even though they may not be participating or understanding them, they're still being exposed to oral language. Children who don't have this type of exposure can be affected by this, and it can impede their language acquisition. Another example of how this can affect language acquisition is the inability to hear certain phonemes or sounds and then know what they mean. So if a child doesn't have that exposure, then when they hear words in class, they may not know what they mean. Another effect of language acquisition is literacy. So literacy is a language process. Words have meaning, and if a student is unable to know or understand the words that they're reading, then they're not going to be able to grow and develop as a reader or a writer. As said before, there are various stages of language acquisition. The first one is primary, and it starts at birth. As soon as babies start to make noise, they hear noise, they might be imitating sounds as they grow older. After that is 9 to 12 months, and that's when babies begin to say their first word. And the words that they say have a purpose. They know that what they're saying has a meaning and is represented by an object. So when they say mom, they know who their mom is, and when they see their mom in a room, they'll be able to identify her with the word mom. Next, at 2 years of age, children now are able to speak 2 or more words, and there's an order to the words. So if a child's playing, they say push toy, or if they want somebody to play with them, they'd say mom, play. Next is 2 to 5 years of age in the primary stage, and this is when children are really learning 20 to 30 new words a day and using them with syntax, even though it might not be in the right order, but they know the meaning of the words and that the words have a purpose. Next is the intermediate stage, and this is from 5 to 10 years of age when students begin to fine-tune their language skills in school. So they're learning vocabulary, they're learning concepts of spelling, like spelling rules, C before I and E, K before everything else. They're learning grammar and writing structure so that they know sentences have a structure, sentences need a verb, a noun, and a subject, and they can use adjectives. And then they also begin to learn how to communicate with expression through writing, and they understand that messages and communications can all be received differently due to expression. After this stage is middle, so this is when children are 10 to 14 years old and they are considered fluent and they're using the language accurately and they understand that it's a complex process. Next is high school, and this is when students are advanced and able to use language to communicate, read, write, and interpret. So as said before, there are impeding factors within language acquisition. So even though I did say that these happen within specific ages, some students do have difficulties and may not progress at the rate that is described on this slide. Cognitive acquisition is the ability and mental process of knowing, understanding, and organizing of experiences, objects, events, thoughts, ideas, and relationships. This stage also begins at birth, so at a very young age, children are able to put meaning to objects and sounds and then words as they grow older. As we grow, our thinking process becomes more elaborate due to the exposure we have to the environment around us. So students grow cognitively as they enter school, and teachers really allow them and help them to expand on schemas and understand and comprehend concepts of language, vocabulary, and text. So, an example for the first stage of at a young age, children put meaning to objects. If a child has been fed with a bottle since they were born, they may not be able to speak, but when they see a bottle, they know that that means they're about to be fed. Impeding factors also happen with cognitive acquisition. This could be a lack of real world experiences, which causes the child to be unable to develop concepts and understand that objects have meanings and emotions can be associated with certain objects and words. A lack of real world exposure could happen when children are not exposed at a young age to text, to experiences outside, socialization, and many more. And then again, limited concepts also affect literacy and development, because if a student isn't able to understand what they're reading or relate to it, then this will lead to comprehension problems with reading and language development. Reading acquisition is the process individuals go through in learning to read fluently through stages. So stages are emergent readers. This is when you see children pretending to read a book. So they're sitting down and they see text, but they'll use the context clues to tell the story. So a child may be sitting down reading a book and they see that on the page the cat is wearing a hat, so they'll point to the text and say the cat has a hat, even though those may not be the exact words of the text, but they understand that they do have a meaning. Next is early readers, and this is when students understand the sound to letter relationship with vowels and consonants. They know common rhymes and word families, ang, ong. They're able to segment multisyllabic words and use context clues. Next is proficient readers, and these are students who understand the structure of words. So they know prefixes and suffixes, and they know that if a word has ed at the end of it, it means happened in the past. They use these skills to pronounce unknown words and put meaning to words they don't know. Next are fluent readers, and these readers are able to read fluently and accurately with comprehension, and this happens at grade level or above grade level. So an example I have for a fluent reader is in my field studies 1 class, and was 3rd grade, and there was a student who was reading Harry Potter, really big chapter book, and when asked to complete comprehension questions, he surpassed them. So he would be considered a fluent reader, maybe even gifted. Again, impeding factors take place with reading acquisition, like language and cognitive. So the first one would be lack of print experience at a young age. So this would be when students aren't read to. They're not shown the book cover, the text, anything like that. Another impediment on reading is negative feelings associated with reading. So if a student does not have a positive experience or outlook with reading, they're not going to fully want to apply themselves to grow as a reader, so they may be stuck at a specific stage, probably early reader or proficient. And then another thing that can affect reading is orthographic knowledge and the obvious outside factors such as learning disabilities and environmental and sociological factors. Orthographic knowledge can be defined as the ability to develop and access mental images of written words through various stages such as alphabetical principle and then more advanced sound pronunciations of letter combinations. The inability to do so affects the success students have with spelling. So if a student is unable to image what letters make a sound when they hear it, they will not be able to decode that word fastly, which students who are able to are more adept at processing larger units than that of the phoneme to grapheme unit, and this results in improved encoding, speeding, retention, and accuracy. So students who do have a strong orthographic knowledge are more successful in literacy. So how does this relate to my case study, and how does this affect his reading progress? This affects his spelling because, as you can see here, this is the elementary spelling inventory I conducted with him. The words were bed, ship, when, lump, float, train, place, drive, bright, and shopping. These are the results of my case study student spelling inventory. So the first two words you can see he got right, but then when it came to when and lump, float, train, place, boat, and shopping, it is pretty evident that all of the vowel sounds are where he had errors. So that, again, that's the orthographic knowledge and being unable to recognize and differentiate which vowel is for what sound. So through observations, I was also able to identify that my case study student struggles with decoding two-syllable words and identifying vowel sounds within the syllables. So this lack of orthographic knowledge has impeded his literacy progress because when he does read, he reads at a very slow pace because he's focused on decoding words and he already has trouble with decoding. So this hinders his reading because his reading cannot be fluent and automatic. In turn, this affects his comprehension because all of his attention is focused on decoding the word and not the actual context and meaning of what he's reading. So spelling and literacy are connected. Linguistically focused spelling instruction helps to facilitate both spelling accuracy and reading, whereas reading instruction does not improve spelling abilities. So when he is able to really improve on his decoding and identifying sound to letter relationships, his spelling will improve, and that will carry over into reading. He'll be able to read fluently and focus on reading more or less on the words themselves. So interventions for orthographic knowledge. I plan to specifically work with vowel sounds and decoding through various decoding exercises, working on reading passages, then going back and locating short vowel sounds and long vowel sounds for specific letters such as E and I, because that's what he struggles with the most. Studying those words, then spelling them when dictated to him orally. And then another example of an intervention I plan to use is vowel sound word sorts. So this is just a quick example of one decoding exercise I did with my student. I made nonsense words and real words and then had him break apart the words where they became separate syllables and then code the vowel sounds in that. And then this also didn't go horribly, but it also showed he does need more work on decoding and vowel sounds. The next factor impeding my case study students' reading success is a combination of ADHD and dyslexia. So dyslexia is a cognitive disability or neurological in origin, but it can be characterized by difficulties with accurate and fluent word recognition, spelling, reading, and decoding. which are all things that my student struggles with. Along with that, he also has attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, which is described and characterized by inattention, distractibility, hyperactivity, and impulsiveness in the classroom. So, as said before, my student has difficulty discriminating between sounds or the sound to letter relationship, but he also has extreme difficulty sitting still, and because of that, he is unable to fully apply himself in the classroom, which affects his learning and being able to improve on his vowel sounds in decoding, which will help with reading. His inability to concentrate, along with the inability to differentiate sounds and to letter relationship, has caused him to become a disfluent reader. He skips over words, punctuations, and leaves off endings and loses his spot. An example of this is when I conducted the running record assessment. He skipped over sometimes sentences, left out words. There was a lot of word deletion, and I thought this was just because he didn't care, when in actuality it was because he isn't able to concentrate because of the ADHD. So my interventions for this is that I think he would be extremely successful and grow as a reader if he was able to really fully participate in class, especially during OG time, which he does not. My misconception that is a part of my intervention was that I thought he was unmotivated, which he may be, but he struggles to pay attention in class, and that's not necessarily his fault. So my intervention for this, through research that I found, was to keep him motivated and engaged by creating goals with him in order to hold him accountable and kind of place the responsibility of his learning in his hands to help him want to do better and help him want to focus. My plan with doing this is that he will overcome his difficulties as well as gain a positive self-image, because I hope that by creating goals with him and then when we achieve them and celebrate them, this will help him have that positive attitude towards learning. Lastly, the impeding factors are the cognitive demands and motivation. So each student has different cognitive abilities, so therefore each student responds differently to tasks. So for example, the task may be reading independently a passage and answering comprehension questions. For one student, this could be a breeze, but for a student struggling in reading, this task is cognitively just overloading and can just cause that student to shut down completely. So students cope with different levels of cognitive load according to the task, their confidence, self-efficiency, recent experiences, and resilience. So when students are not intrinsically motivated, this affects their literacy development. And keeping in mind that the English language itself is completely complex and very demanding, teachers need to keep that in mind when students are struggling to learn to read and write. So for my case study student, an example of the cognitive demands that reading and spelling have on him is that when he feels frustrated or overloaded, he'll stop. And if it's something he knows he struggles on, I'm definitely unable to get him motivated thus far with my time with him. So for my intervention, I plan to create assignments and assessments that involve multiple intelligences. When I conducted the interest inventory, I learned that he's a kinesthetic learner. He likes drawing, he likes sports, so by knowing this, I can differentiate by interest when I meet with him and keep him engaged, focused, and motivated. What have I learned from my research? I've learned that literacy and language are incredibly interconnected, and this is very important because if one area is lagging or hindered, this then affects language or vice versa, literacy and writing. I did not know how ADHD affected one's reading abilities, but now I am aware of that, and I can see how this affects my case study student, and now that I'm aware of it, we can work to help him overcome his difficulties. And I didn't realize how important differentiated instruction was in meeting students' needs, especially to keep them engaged and motivated, especially for this case with my student specifically. I learned how complex the English language truly is, and I think this is important to keep in mind in my future classroom when I do have students struggling. And again, I also learned the importance of creating a positive environment and helping students create and keep that positive self-image. That way they're motivated to succeed. How does this information help me to better plan for my interventions with my case study? Well, I learned that I need to differentiate more in my interventions to keep my student engaged and have him want to do well and want to learn. And I think that by creating our goals or his goals together, this will really help with that. And that's something I'm really excited to put into place. I also learned that I don't want to cognitively overload him, but I do want to encourage him to do his best work. Another thing that I learned from my research that I will use in my interventions is in order to avoid that word deletion and misplacement while reading, due to the ADHD, I need to remind him to take it slow and track his words as he reads in order to completely avoid that. And then I also learned the various ways to implement specific and explicit orthographic progress, so working specifically on vowel sounds and decoding, really honing in on that. I think that by doing all of these things, my case study student will improve and then be able to grow as a reader.